In the chaotic symphony of an international airport, a single sharp sound cut through the noise, the rip of paper. For 13-year-old Noah Harrington, it was the sound of his dream trip to London tearing apart. For Susan Caldwell, a veteran flight attendant on the edge, it was a moment of asserting control. She stared down at the young black boy alone in the first-class line, a smug sense of righteousness on her face. She saw a kid who didn't belong, a ticket that must have been a mistake or a fraud. What she didn't see, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the name printed on that ticket, Harrington, wasn't just a passenger. It was the name that signed her paychecks. She had just publicly humiliated the son of the man who owned the entire airline, and the consequences were about to taxi to her gate. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar cocktail of jet fuel floor polish and anxious energy. For 13-year-old Noah Harrington, it was the scent of adventure. He clutched his backpack, the straps digging slightly into his shoulders, and stared through the vast floor-to-ceiling windows at the colossal machine waiting on the tarmac. A Boeing 777-300ER, its twin GE90 engines glistening under the afternoon sun. He knew its wingspan to the inch 212 feet 7 inches, and the thrust capacity of its engines 115 300-pounds force. To others, it was just a plane. To Noah, it was a masterpiece of engineering a chariot to the sky. This trip was a rite of passage. His father, Robert Harrington, had promised him that when he turned 13, he could take his first solo international flight. The destination was London, where he would meet his dad for a weekend of museum hopping and exploring the city before they flew back together. Robert believed in fostering independence, in teaching his son to navigate the world with quiet confidence, not with the flashing lights of privilege. That's why Noah was here alone with a simple backpack, a phone for emergencies, and a first-class ticket, a small comfort his father insisted upon for a solo minor. Noah adjusted the brim of his baseball cap and checked the boarding pass on his phone again. Aura Airlines Flight 104, New York to London Heathrow. Seat 2A. He felt a thrill course through him. He'd been in the cockpit of these planes on the ground, thanks to his father, but flying in one seated right near the front felt different. It felt like he was part of the magic. The boarding announcement for first-class passengers crackled to life. Noah joined the short, orderly queue, standing behind a businessman, talking loudly on his phone about mergers and acquisitions. When it was his turn, he stepped forward and presented his phone to the gate agent. The agent scanned it with a polite smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Harrington." As he walked down the jet bridge, the anticipation was palpable. He could feel the slight vibration of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit. He stepped through the doorway and was greeted by a flight attendant. "Welcome aboard," she said, her smile professional but weary. "Thank you," Noah replied, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the spacious cabin. He found his seat 2A, a luxurious pod with its own screen, a plush blanket, and noise-canceling headphones. It was even better than he had imagined. He carefully stowed his backpack in the overhead bin, took his seat, and immediately turned his attention to the window, watching the ground crew buzzing around the aircraft like worker bees. That's when he first noticed her. Her name tag read Susan. She was the lead flight attendant, her movements sharp and efficient, but her face was etched with a deep-seated tension. She moved through the first-class cabin with an air of proprietary scrutiny, her eyes lingering a moment too long on anyone or anything that seemed out of place. Her gaze swept over Noah, a brief dismissive flicker before moving on. Noah didn't think much of it. He was too engrossed in the marvel of the moment. The problem began 20 minutes later. The cabin was nearly full. A flight attendant was offering pre-departure drinks. Noah politely asked for an orange juice. A few minutes after it arrived, Susan Caldwell approached his seat. She wasn't smiling. "I need to see your boarding pass again," she said, her tone flat and devoid of the warmth typically afforded to first-class passengers. Slightly confused, Noah pulled out his phone and showed her the digital pass. Susan squinted at the screen, her lips pursed into a thin line. "This is seat 2A, she stated, as if he were unaware. "Yes, ma'am," Noah said respectfully. "Who are you traveling with?" She pressed her eyes, scanning the seats around him. "I'm on my own," Noah answered. Susan's expression hardened. It was a subtle shift, but the air around her grew cold. The professional veneer cracked, revealing a foundation of suspicion. She looked from Noah's simple jeans and hoodie to the expensive leather seat he was sitting in, and her mind, soured by years of personal frustrations and simmering prejudices, drew a conclusion. Unaccompanied minors are typically boarded with an agent and personally handed over to the cabin crew. "You just walked on," she accused. "The gate agent scanned my ticket. He said it was all fine," Noah explained calmly. Though a knot of unease was beginning to form in his stomach. He'd flown domestically alone before. He knew the procedures. His father had ensured everything was in order. "There must be a mistake," Susan said, her voice growing louder, drawing the attention of the passenger in 2B, a well-dressed woman with a laptop. "This is a first-class cabin. Tickets are thousands of dollars. Sometimes there are glitches in the system. You might be in the wrong seat or even on the wrong plane." And each word was a thinly veiled insult. The implication was clear: you don't belong here. Noah felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. He was a quiet kid, taught to be respectful and not to cause a scene. "My ticket is for this seat," he insisted, his voice quiet but firm. "My dad booked it." "Your dad?" Susan scoffed a little too loudly. "And who is your dad?" Before Noah could answer, she made a decision. "I need you to come with me to the front. We have to sort this out. You can't stay here until we verify this ticket." Her tone was no longer that of an airline employee solving a problem. It was that of a warden addressing an inmate. The woman in 2B, whose name tag on her briefcase read Audrey Chen, lowered her glasses and looked at Susan. "Is there a problem, miss?" Audrey asked, her voice calm and questioning. "The boy isn't bothering anyone." Susan shot her a venomous glare. "This is an official crew matter, ma'am. Please mind your own business." She then turned back to Noah. "Now, let's go." Reluctantly, Noah unbuckled his seatbelt. He felt the eyes of every other passenger on him. He felt judged, misplaced, and deeply, profoundly humiliated. As he followed Susan toward the galley at the front of the plane, he had no idea that this was just the beginning of the nightmare, a storm gathering that would change everything. The galley was a cramped, sterile space of stainless steel and tightly packed service carts. The roar of the engines was more pronounced here, a low, powerful hum that vibrated through the floor. Another younger flight attendant named Ben was organizing glasses, and he looked up with surprise as Susan marched Noah into the small area. "What's going on, Susan?" Ben asked, sensing the tension. "We have a ticketing discrepancy," Susan announced, her voice dripping with authority. "This passenger's boarding pass needs to be authenticated. I think he may have slipped through." Noah stood silently, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but the words felt stuck in his throat. He had been taught by his father to handle problems logically and calmly, but he had never faced an adult who seemed so determined to believe the worst of him. "I need your phone," Susan demanded, holding out her hand. Noah handed it to her. She snatched it and began tapping at the screen, her movements jerky and impatient. "Harrington, Noah Harrington, seat 2A, she muttered, as if the name itself were an offense. She scanned a manifest on a tablet mounted to the wall. His name was there clear as day. First class, unaccompanied. Minor designation checked. Priority status. For a rational employee, this would have been the end of it. A simple misunderstanding, perhaps worthy of an apology. But Susan Caldwell was not feeling rational. She was a woman drowning in quiet desperation. Her husband had been laid off from his construction job 6 months ago. They were behind on their mortgage. She was working double shifts. Her feet ached, and her patience had been worn down to a single frayed thread. A recent performance review had flagged her for customer service abruptness, and she was on thin ice. Seeing this young black boy so calm and self-possessed in a seat that cost more than her monthly mortgage payment ignited a fuse of resentment and prejudice she didn't even know she had. It felt unfair. Her frustration, unable to find a legitimate outlet, created its own. The digital pass could be a forgery, she declared, a wild accusation that made even Ben's eyes widen. I need the original booking confirmation, the email, the receipt. Noah swallowed hard. My dad has all that. I just have the pass on my phone. Convenient, Susan sneered. So there's no proof you actually paid for this ticket. It was paid for, Noah said, his voice trembling slightly with anger now. My father is Robert Harrington. He said the name simply without any expectation that it would mean anything to her other than being his father's name. He wasn't trying to use it as a weapon, but to Susan, it sounded like a desperate bluff. At that moment, Audrey Chen, the woman from seat 2B, appeared at the edge of the galley. She had seen the direction this was heading and could no longer stay silent. This has gone on long enough, Ms. Chen said firmly, her gaze fixed on Susan. I've been sitting right there. You are harassing this child based on nothing but your own assumptions. His name is on the manifest. What more do you need? Susan whirled around to face her. I told you this is an official matter. Return to your seat, or I will have you removed for interfering with a flight crew. The threat was empty and absurd, and they both knew it. But Susan was too far gone cornered by her own baseless accusations. She needed to win. She turned back to Noah, her face a mask of fury. In her twisted logic, he was the cause of this confrontation, the source of her potential downfall. I am the lead attendant on this flight, and I am responsible for security. I am not satisfied with this passenger's documentation, she announced to Ben and the now watching cockpit crew who had opened their door to see about the commotion. I am denying him boarding. Ben looked horrified. Susan, you can't do that. Everything seems to be in order. We should just call the gate agent. I'm handling it, she snapped. Then she did the unthinkable. As if to finalize her declaration to make it irreversible, she looked at Noah and said, We don't need this. And with a swift, vicious motion, she took a paper copy of the boarding pass Noah had printed as a backup, which she had demanded from his bag, held it up in front of his face, and tore it in two. Then, for good measure, she tore the pieces in half again. The 4 small scraps of paper fluttered to the floor of the galley. A collective gasp went through the small space. Ben stared, speechless. The co-pilot leaning out of the cockpit looked on in disbelief. Audrey Chen's hand flew to her mouth. For Noah, the world seemed to slow down. The sound of the tearing paper was like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was his excitement, his independence, his father's trust. It was his dignity. All of it ripped to shreds by this angry, hateful woman. He didn't cry. The shock was too great, the humiliation too deep. A cold, hard resolve began to form where the hurt had been. You can't do that, he whispered, his voice shaking but clear. I just did, Susan said, a triumphant, ugly glint in her eyes. She gestured to the open aircraft door. "Now get off my plane. Security will escort you back to the terminal." She pointed a finger at Ben. "Ben, call airport security. Tell them we have a passenger to remove." Ben hesitated, his face pale. He looked from his superior's unhinged expression to the devastated but composed face of the 13-year-old boy. He knew this was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. But he was a junior attendant, 2 years on the job. Susan could make his life hell. Fear won. He reached for the interphone, his hand trembling. Noah looked at the torn pieces of his ticket on the floor, then back at Susan's smug face. He didn't move. He simply held her gaze, and in his eyes there was no longer fear or sadness, but a chilling adult calm. It was the calm of a gathering storm. 2 burly JFK airport security officers, their faces impassive, escorted Noah off the plane. He didn't look back. He walked with a straight back, his head held high, refusing to give Susan Caldwell the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. The whispers of the first-class passengers followed him down the jet bridge, a mixture of pity and outrage. Audrey Chen watched him go, her expression one of pure fury, directed at the flight attendant, who was now trying to act as if everything was normal. Once back in the terminal, the officers led him to a small, featureless office near the gate. One of them, a man with a kinder face, asked, "Son, is there someone we can call for you? Your parents?" Noah nodded his composure, unwavering. "Yes, please. My father." He gave them the number. The officer dialed and handed the phone to Noah. He took a deep breath, the first one that didn't feel tight and constricted in his chest. The phone rang twice before it was answered. "Noah, you should be taking off by now. Everything okay, champ?" The voice on the other end was warm, deep, and familiar. It was the voice of Robert Harrington. "Dad," Noah began, and for a moment his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and started again, forcing the emotion down. They kicked me off the plane." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Robert Harrington was in a conference room in his midtown Manhattan office, finalizing the details of a multi-billion-dollar engine acquisition deal with Rolls-Royce. He immediately waved a hand at his executives, signaling for a pause. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city skyline, his entire focus narrowing to his son's voice. "What do you mean they kicked you off the plane?" Robert asked, his voice dangerously calm. "What happened?" Noah recounted the events with methodical precision, his voice steady. He didn't embellish or editorialize. He simply stated the facts: the flight attendant's questions, her accusations, her demand for proof of payment, Ms. Chen's intervention, and finally the act of tearing up his boarding pass. He finished by saying, "Her name was Susan. She said I didn't belong in first class." Robert Harrington closed his eyes. In his mind's eye, he saw his bright, kind, aviation-loving son, so excited for his first solo adventure, being subjected to a public shaming born of pure prejudice. A wave of fury, cold and absolute, washed over him. It was not the hot, impulsive anger of a tantrum, but the focused glacial rage of a man who moved mountains for a living. His son, the person he cherished most in the world, had been hurt. The company he had built from the ground up, a company meant to represent the pinnacle of service and respect, had been the instrument of that pain. "Noah, listen to me very carefully," Robert said, his voice a low, controlled baritone. "Where are you right now?" "In a security office by gate C-26. "Are the officers with you?" "Yes, Dad." "Put one of them on the phone." Noah handed the phone back to the kinder officer. "My dad wants to talk to you." The officer took the phone, looking perplexed. "Hello? This is Officer Miller." "Officer Miller." Robert Harrington's voice came through the speaker, radiating an authority that had nothing to do with volume. "My name is Robert Harrington. I am Noah's father. I am also the chairman and CEO of Aura Airlines. I need you to do 2 things for me. First, stay with my son. Do not let him out of your sight, and ensure he is comfortable. Second, do not under any circumstances allow Flight 104 to depart from that gate. Am I clear? Officer Miller's jaw went slack. He looked at the calm, polite boy sitting in the chair, then back at the phone. He had heard the name Robert Harrington before. Everyone who worked at JFK knew who owned Aura Airlines. His mind scrambled to connect the dots. The quiet kid in the hoodie, the first-class ticket, the name. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Yes, sir. Mr. Harrington, sir. Crystal clear. Officer Miller stammered, his professionalism suddenly snapping to military attention. Good, Robert said. I am on my way. He hung up. He turned to his stunned executive team. Apologies, gentlemen. This meeting is over. A serious internal matter requires my immediate attention. He strode out of the room, already dialing a new number on his phone. It was the private line of Patricia Gable, his chief operating officer. Patricia, he said the moment she answered. We have a 5-alarm fire on Flight 104 at JFK. Robert, what's wrong? They just ejected my son from the plane. He quickly relayed the story. Patricia, a woman known for her unflappable demeanor, was audibly shocked. Ground that flight, Patricia, Robert commanded. I don't care if it's already pushing back from the gate. I want it stopped and returned to the terminal. I want the jet bridge reconnected. No one gets off. No one. I'm leaving the city now. I'll be at gate C-26 in 45 minutes. Consider it done, Robert, she said without hesitation. The order was unprecedented, but the reason was undeniable. An action of this magnitude would cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars in delays, fuel, and passenger compensation. But Robert Harrington didn't care. A line had been crossed, and a message needed to be sent not just to one employee, but to his entire organization. On board Flight 104, Susan Caldwell was feeling a surge of vindication. She had removed the problem. She had asserted her authority. The cabin was calm again. She directed Ben to continue the pre-departure service, ignoring his shaken expression. The main cabin door was sealed with a heavy thud. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing a flight time of 6 hours and 40 minutes to London, and asking the cabin crew to prepare for departure. The plane began to push back from the gate. Susan allowed herself a small, tight smile of satisfaction. It was the last smile she would have for a very long time. The Boeing 777 shuddered gently as the tug pushed it back from the gate. Inside, the routine dance of departure was underway. The safety video played on the seatback screens, and the flight attendants moved through the cabin ensuring seatbelts were fastened and bags were stowed. Susan Caldwell oversaw the process with a renewed sense of command, the incident with the boy already being mentally filed away as a security issue correctly handled. Then something highly unusual happened. The gentle rearward motion of the aircraft stopped abruptly. The engines, which had been spooling up with their characteristic whine, throttled back down to a low hum. A confused silence fell over the cabin. Passengers exchanged perplexed looks. The captain's voice, now laced with confusion, crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We seem to be having a slight delay. We've received an instruction from ground control to hold our position. We're trying to get some more information. Please remain seated. Susan frowned. This was not normal. Delays happened on the taxiway, not during pushback. She walked toward the cockpit. The door opened before she got there, and the captain, a veteran pilot named George Findlay, looked out, his brow furrowed. Susan, what the hell is going on in your cabin? I just got a direct order from the operations tower, who got it directly from our corporate COO, to halt departure and return to the gate immediately. They said it's a critical crew-related security incident. Did somebody threaten you? Is there a dangerous passenger on board? Susan's blood ran cold. No, Captain, nothing like that. We had a small ticketing issue with a passenger who was removed, but it was resolved. Resolved? The captain asked, his voice rising. It doesn't sound resolved. An order like this from that high up I've been flying for 30 years, and I've never had the COO personally halt a flight. They're telling me to reconnect the jet bridge and wait for a corporate delegation to board. A delegation! The word hung in the air. Susan's triumphant feeling began to curdle into a knot of pure dread. This couldn't be about the boy. That was impossible. It was a minor issue. She had been in the right. Hadn't she? The plane began to move again, not toward the runway, but slowly, ponderously back toward gate C-26. The passengers murmured, growing restless and anxious. Ben, the junior attendant, was pale-faced, avoiding Susan's gaze. He knew with a sinking certainty that this was about the boy. He had seen the name on the manifest Harrington, and while it hadn't registered at first, the extreme nature of this response was making a terrifying connection in his mind. The jet bridge reconnected to the aircraft with a solid, final-sounding thud. A moment later, the distinctive sound of the cabin door being unlocked and opened from the outside echoed through the plane. All eyes turned to the entrance. The first person to step on board was not a gate agent or a security officer. It was Patricia Gable, the chief operating officer of Aura Airlines, her face like stone. She was flanked by the head of JFK Airport Operations and two grim-faced security officials. And behind them, his tailored suit doing little to conceal the formidable rage radiating from him, was Robert Harrington. He was a man whose face was on the cover of Forbes and Fortune magazines, a familiar figure in the business world, and the face of Aura Airlines from the CEO page in every in-flight magazine. There was an instant shocked ripple of recognition among the business travelers in the first-class cabin. Susan Caldwell saw him, and her world simply stopped. Her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. The name. Harrington. The boy's calm, unwavering stare. My father is Robert Harrington. It wasn't a bluff. It was a statement of fact. The blood drained from her face, and her knees felt weak. The smug satisfaction she had felt only moments before was replaced by a terror so profound it was paralyzing. Robert Harrington's eyes, cold and piercing, swept the cabin. They did not stop until they found Susan. He walked down the aisle, his expensive shoes making no sound on the thick carpet, and stopped directly in front of her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The controlled fury in his whisper was more terrifying than any shout. You are Susan Caldwell, he stated. It wasn't a question. Susan could only manage a choked, squeaking nod. You work for my airline, he continued, his voice low and menacing. And you took it upon yourself to publicly humiliate and eject a 13-year-old child from this aircraft. My child. My son. A collective gasp went through the cabin. The full, unbelievable reality of the situation crashed down upon everyone who had witnessed the event. The businessman who had been on his phone, the couple across the aisle. Everyone now understood. Audrey Chen from seat 2B unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Mr. Harrington, she said, her voice clear and strong. I am a witness to the entire event. Your son conducted himself with impeccable grace. This woman, Ms. Caldwell, was unprofessional, belligerent, and her actions were motivated by what I can only describe as blatant prejudice. She accused him of forgery and tore his boarding pass to pieces in front of him. It was disgraceful. Robert Harrington gave Ms. Chen a single appreciative nod before turning his devastating gaze back to Susan. "You tore up his ticket." Susan was trembling, her carefully constructed world collapsing into rubble around her. I thought there was a discrepancy. I was following security protocol." She stammered the words, empty, pathetic lies even to her own ears. "You were following your own bigotry," Robert Harrington corrected her, his voice slicing through her excuses. "You looked at a black child in a first-class seat and decided he didn't belong. You didn't see a passenger. You saw a problem. In my company on my aircraft, you are the problem." He turned to Patricia Gable. "Patricia, Ms. Caldwell's employment with Aura Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. Have her credentials revoked and escort her from the aircraft. And have security find her replacement for this flight from the standby crew. We're already delayed." Then he looked past Susan to the pale, trembling junior attendant. "And you? Your name is Ben." Ben swallowed hard and nodded, unable to speak. "You stood there and watched this happen." Robert said, his tone one of deep disappointment. "You watched a senior crew member abuse a child, and you did nothing." I was scared," Ben whispered, shamefaced. "She's my superior." "Leadership isn't about titles, son. It's about doing what's right, especially when it's hard," Robert said. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Ben looked like he was about to faint. The karma that was about to unfold was just beginning. For Susan, it would be a swift and brutal fall. For the airline, it would be a moment of reckoning. And for Robert Harrington, it was about to become much more than just defending his son. It was about redefining the very soul of the company he had built. The termination was brutally efficient. Patricia Gable stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Susan, please surrender your company ID and all cabin keys. Your personal effects will be gathered from your locker and sent to you. Please follow me." Susan Caldwell stood frozen for a moment, the reality of the words washing over her. Terminated. Here, in the middle of the first-class cabin in front of passengers and her crew. The humiliation was a physical force pressing the air from her lungs. She fumbled with the lanyard around her neck, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unclip her ID badge. She handed it to Patricia, avoiding the COO's eyes, avoiding the pitying and scornful stares of the passengers, and most of all, avoiding the icy gaze of Robert Harrington. As two security officers quietly escorted a shell-shocked Susan off the plane and down the jet bridge, Robert Harrington addressed the stunned passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Aura Airlines, I offer my most sincere and profound apologies for the delay and for the disgraceful behavior you have been forced to witness. This is not who we are. This is not what we stand for. Every passenger on this aircraft, regardless of age, race, or class of ticket, is to be treated with the utmost respect. Clearly, we have failed in that mission today." He turned to Audrey Chen. "Ma'am, thank you for speaking up. Integrity is a rare commodity, and you have shown it in abundance. Your flight today, and all your future flights with Aura, are on us. A representative from my office will be in touch." Audrey Chen simply nodded, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Robert's attention then returned to Ben, who still stood by the galley, looking as if he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "Ben," Robert said, his voice softer now, but no less serious. "You had a choice. You could have spoken up. A quiet word to the captain, a call to the gate agent on the interphone. You could have done something. You chose not to. Fear is an explanation. but it is not an excuse. Ben finally found his voice, tears welling in his eyes. I know, sir. I'm so sorry. I've never seen her like that. I froze. What she did to your son was awful, and I will regret not intervening for the rest of my life. His apology was genuine, raw, and filled with self-loathing. Robert Harrington studied him for a long moment. He saw not a coward, but a young man who had been intimidated, who had failed a moral test, and was now painfully aware of it. Regret is a powerful teacher, Robert said. You have a choice now, too. You can let this failure define you, or you can learn from it and ensure that you never ever stand by and watch an injustice happen again. Which will it be? I'll learn from it, sir, Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. I swear it. Good, Robert said, because as of this moment the lead flight attendant for this flight has quit. You're now in charge. Get this cabin secured and ready for departure. Show me you've learned something. Ben's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Promoted. In the midst of this disaster, it was a test, a chance at redemption. He straightened up, wiped his eyes, and a new resolve settled on his face. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. He immediately began directing the other flight attendants with a newfound, albeit shaky, authority. Robert Harrington made his way back to the terminal, where he found Noah sitting with Officer Miller, calmly sipping a bottle of water. He knelt in front of his son, his expression softening as he took in his stoic face. Are you okay, Noah? He asked, his voice full of a father's concern. Noah nodded. I'm okay, Dad. I was just embarrassed. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. You did nothing wrong, Robert said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. What that woman did was a reflection of her own character, not yours. I'm proud of how you handled yourself. He stood up and addressed the captain and a new lead attendant who had just arrived. My son will be reboarding. Please ensure the rest of his flight is comfortable and uneventful. He turned back to Noah. I'll see you in London, champ. See you, Dad? Noah said, a small smile finally returning to his face. As Noah was personally escorted back to his seat, the very same seat, 2A, by a deeply apologetic Captain Robert Harrington, walked back through the terminal. The immediate fire was out, but the larger battle was just beginning. The karma for Susan Caldwell was not merely the loss of a job. It was the complete and public unraveling of a life built on a fragile foundation. The story, as is inevitable in the modern world, went viral. Audrey Chen, a C-suite executive for a major tech firm with a significant social media following, had typed out the entire incident on her laptop while the drama unfolded. As soon as the plane was in the air, she connected to the Wi-Fi and posted her account on LinkedIn and Twitter. She didn't use the flight attendant's full name, but she described the incident in vivid, damning detail, praising Robert Harrington's swift and decisive action. Within hours, the story was everywhere. News outlets picked it up. Aura Airline's CEO grounds flight after son is racially profiled by crew. The comments sections exploded. Former colleagues of Susan Caldwell began to speak out anonymously, painting a picture of a woman who was perpetually bitter, who often made thinly veiled racist or classist remarks, and who was known for being a workplace bully. Susan arrived home to find her husband already stressed and emasculated by his unemployment, watching the news. Her face wasn't shown, but the story was unmistakable. The confrontation that followed was brutal. He accused her of ruining them, of letting her nasty attitude finally destroy their lives. The financial pressure, which had been a crack in their marriage, now became a chasm. She was blacklisted from the industry. No other major airline would touch her. The flight attendants' union, after reviewing the overwhelming testimony from passengers and crew, declined to support her wrongful termination claim. She was radioactive. The modest savings they had were quickly depleted. Within 3 months, the foreclosure notice appeared on their door. Her husband left a week later, unable to bear the weight of the public shame and financial ruin. Susan Caldwell, who had sought a moment of power by belittling a child, now had nothing. She had lost her job, her reputation, her home, and her husband. The karma was not a single lightning strike. It was a slow, agonizing burn, forcing her to confront the ugly prejudice she had allowed to fester within her. Alone in a small rented apartment surrounded by packing boxes, she was finally forced to look in the mirror and face the person who was truly responsible for her own destruction. Robert Harrington understood that punishing one employee was not a solution. It was a symptom. The incident with Noah had exposed a potential cultural rot within his company, a failure that went far beyond a single employee's bad day. True justice, he believed, was not just punitive, but restorative. The karma had to be about more than Susan Caldwell's downfall. It had to be about building something better in its place. In the week that followed, he didn't just go back to business as usual. He initiated a top-to-bottom company-wide review of all diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI policies. He brought in one of the country's top consulting firms, led by a renowned sociologist named Dr. Anita Sharma, to conduct a full audit of Airline's hiring practices, training modules, and complaint procedures. The findings were uncomfortable. While Aura had a DEI policy on paper, the training was a generic check-the-box online module that employees clicked through once a year. The system for reporting microaggressions or prejudiced behavior was convoluted and often led to retaliation against the accuser, not the offender. The culture, especially among senior staff, often protected its own. Susan Caldwell was not an anomaly. She was a product of a system that had allowed her biases to go unchecked for years. Robert faced the report head-on. In a company-wide town hall broadcast to all 60,000 Aura employees worldwide, he stood on a stage and spoke with raw honesty. "Last week, my son was the victim of prejudice on one of our own aircraft." He began, his voice echoing in the large hangar where the event was held. "My first reaction was that of a father anger. My second reaction was that of a CEO shame. Shame that the culture I am responsible for creating could allow such an event to happen. We can blame one employee, and she has been held accountable for her actions. But this is not about one person. This is about us. All of us." He laid out a sweeping new initiative, which he called the Aura Pledge. It involved a complete overhaul of their training. The new program would be in-person mandatory and led by experts like Dr. Sharma. It would involve difficult conversations about unconscious bias, privilege, and the real-world impact of prejudice. He announced a new anonymous third-party reporting system for all forms of harassment and discrimination, with a zero-tolerance policy for retaliation. Furthermore, he announced a significant change to their promotion criteria. From now on, 360-degree reviews that included feedback from subordinates and peers on inclusive leadership would be a major component of any advancement to a managerial or lead position. "You will not lead at this company," he stated firmly, "if you cannot lead with respect for everyone." He publicly recognized the two other key players in the incident. Ben Carter, the junior flight attendant, was given a special commendation for his honesty in the aftermath. Robert made it clear that while his initial inaction was a failure, his subsequent ownership of it and his commitment to change were what Aura valued. Ben became an unlikely but powerful symbol within the company of the importance of learning from one's mistakes. He was asked to speak to new hire training classes, sharing his story as a cautionary tale, about the perils of being a bystander. Robert also reached out personally to Audrey Chen. After thanking her again, he learned that her company's charitable foundation was focused on STEM education for underserved communities. He saw an opportunity. He announced the formation of the Noah Harrington Aviation Initiative, a multi-million-dollar partnership between Aura Airlines and several nonprofits, including Ms. Chen's. The initiative would create scholarships, mentorship programs, and free flight school training for underprivileged teenagers who dreamed of careers in aviation as pilots, engineers, and yes, even flight attendants. He wanted to turn the ugliest moment in his company's recent history into its most inspiring. He was transforming the poison of prejudice into the antidote of opportunity. The response was overwhelming. Internally, there was some grumbling from a small minority who felt the changes were an overreaction, but the vast majority of employees embraced them. They felt proud to work for a company whose leader was willing to publicly admit fault and invest heavily in fixing the problem. The story boosted morale and made Aura a more attractive workplace for new talent. Externally, the PR nightmare transformed into a masterclass in corporate responsibility. Aura Airlines stock, which had dipped briefly after the incident, soared to a new high. Customers wrote letters and posted online expressing their admiration for how the situation was handled. They weren't just buying a plane ticket anymore. They were supporting a company that stood for something. The hard karma for Susan Caldwell was her personal implosion. But the deeper, more profound karma was the systemic good that grew from the ashes of her actions. Her single act of tearing up a ticket had, in a strange twist of fate, created a ripple effect that would improve the lives of thousands of people, from the employees who would now work in a more respectful environment to the young, aspiring aviators who would now have a chance to achieve their dreams. The world, in a small but significant way, was being reshaped for the better, all because she had picked on the wrong kid. 6 months had passed. The chill of a London autumn was in the air. At a small airfield just outside the city, the roar of a single-engine Cessna 172 filled the air as it made a smooth landing on the runway. The plane taxied to a halt, and the propeller spun to a stop. The door opened, and a beaming Noah Harrington hopped out, followed by a flight instructor. Waiting for him on the tarmac was his father. "How was it?" Robert asked, grinning as he handed Noah a bottle of water. "Amazing." Noah breathed, his eyes still shining with the thrill of it. "Dave let me handle most of the approach. The crosswind was a little tricky, but I managed it." "He's a natural, Mr. Harrington," the instructor said, clapping Noah on the shoulder. "One of the best young students I've ever had." As the instructor went to secure the plane, Robert and Noah walked toward the small airfield cafe. They sat at an outdoor table, watching other small planes take off and land. The trauma of the incident at JFK felt like a lifetime ago, a distant scar rather than an open wound. Noah wasn't defined by the humiliation he had suffered. He had been emboldened by the justice he had witnessed. "You know," Noah said, looking at his father, "I was thinking about that day, on the plane." Robert nodded, giving his son his full attention. "What about it?" "I was angry at that woman Susan," Noah said thoughtfully, "for a long time. But now, I just kind of feel sorry for her." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Sorry for her, why?" "Because her world must be so small," Noah explained, with a wisdom beyond his years. "To look at someone and decide you know their whole story just because of what they look like, she must be so unhappy, so scared to need to feel powerful by hurting a kid. What you did, all the stuff with the company, the Aura pledge and the scholarship, That was a much bigger answer than just getting her fired. Robert felt a swell of pride that had nothing to do with profits or stock prices. This was his true legacy. A son who understood the difference between revenge and justice. What she did was wrong, Noah, and there had to be consequences, Robert said. But you're right. The goal isn't just to punish the people who do wrong. It's to build a world where it's harder for them to do it in the first place. It's to create more opportunities, more understanding, so that there are fewer people like her whose hearts are filled with bitterness. He looked out at the runway, at the planes soaring into the sky, each one a symbol of freedom and possibility. When I started Aura Airlines, he continued, I wanted to connect the world. I was thinking about connecting cities New York to London, Paris, to Tokyo. That incident reminded me that the most important connections are the ones between people. And those connections are built on respect. The moment we lose that, our wings are clipped. Noah looked at his dad, then up at a plane climbing steeply into the blue expanse. He finally understood. The incident hadn't been about him, not really. It had been a test. For Susan, for Ben, for Ms. Chen, and most of all for his father and the company he led. It was a story about how a single ugly act of tearing a piece of paper could in the right hands become the blueprint for building something stronger, kinder, and more just than what had existed before. From the ground, all you could see was the injustice. But from 10,000 feet, you could see the beginning of a better flight plan. The story of Noah Harrington and Susan Caldwell is a powerful reminder that our actions, no matter how small they seem, create ripples that can become tidal waves. One person's prejudice became another's catalyst for profound systemic change. It shows that true karma isn't just about punishment. It's about balance. While Susan's world fell apart due to the bitterness she harbored, Robert Harrington used his power not just for retribution, but for restoration, building a legacy of opportunity from an incident of hate. This story teaches us that integrity is what you do when no one is watching, but true character is what you do when everyone is. It reminds us all to stand up, to speak out, and to be the person who intervenes, because we never know when our voice might be the one that helps justice take flight. If this story of unexpected justice and powerful consequences resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories where karma delivers the final verdict. What did you think of Robert Harrington's response? Let us know in the comments below.